Welcome to a recorded session of the RareX info session. RareX is a program of global genes, and today we hope to tell you all about what we can do for you or your community. My name is Megan O'Boyle, and I am the Community Engagement Lead for RareX. And I'm also the parent of a 22-year-old adult with a rare neurodevelopmental disorder. And although I never founded a foundation, I wasn't that much of a go-getter, and I wasn't terribly interested in research, I was recruited by some other volunteer parents back in 2010 to start a registry. And I didn't know what a registry was. And so eventually we got this registry off the ground with lots of questions. And we had our families answer those questions for 10 years. And it was very informative to the families and to our foundation, but the researchers didn't seem to be publishing on it. And this was this happened with a lot of different registries that happened in the early years. And a lot of lessons were learned. So the great part of my job as community engagement lead is I get to impart all the things that I learned in the 10 years as a principal investigator of one registry to people like you, so that you don't have to go through what so many of us did in the early years. So I'm going to go ahead and share slides. Our emails are at the last end of the slide deck. So if you have any questions, go ahead and jot them down during this presentation, and you can go ahead and send us emails with your questions, and go ahead and get started. So Global Genes is a wonderful umbrella support organization for rare diseases that started over 15 years ago. And it does a myriad of things for all sorts of stakeholders in the rare disease community. And we are supporting next generation advocacy. And this means we're providing patient advocates like yourselves a continuum of service. This isn't just a one box item. And that's to accelerate the path from early support and awareness, from when you were a Facebook group to maybe a legal entity, to research readiness and using collaborative approach to involve industry early on, and researchers and funders. And all of this data is at the core. The three pillars for Global Genes are access, enablement, and equity, shown through support, education, and research. So under support, if you go to the Global Genes website, you will see all different ways of getting support for individual patients, undiagnosed patients, and patient organizations. There's also a great education aspect. We offer all sorts of toolkits and webinars and lunch and learns, and I encourage you to check those out. And finally, research. All of us need support in this rare environment, but many of us are seeking preventions and treatments, and that's only going to come from research. And one of the most important things in research is data, and that's what we're here to talk about. Now, there's lots of different stages to research, and they don't always go in the exact linear order, but you have basic research, which is they call bench, and then you have post-drug, which is commercial, and that's once the drug is at, or device is at bedside. So bench to bedside. It's also called translational research. So if you note, in all of these blue columns, under each of these stages of research, you will see the word data. And this is really important. It means from beginning to end, collection of data is critical. So a few definitions, housekeeping, before I go too far into our presentation. I'm going to refer to the DCP, which is our data collection program or platform. If you're looking at other vendors or platforms, they probably refer to themselves as a registry. And that's correct. We could be considered a registry, but there's lots of definitions of what a registry is, everything from an address, a contact registry, to what they call a natural history study. So RareX is all sorts of things, and we are identifying as a data collection program. I may refer to a class. So we onboard a class about once a month, and there's generally about 10 diseases in each class. And so that's a group of communities that come on at the same time. Onboarding is 4 weeks. And that's select leaders from your organization would attend 4 one-hour onboarding calls, and then you launch. And that means that that's when you go live with your data collection program to your world community. The launch is a webinar that you host, and that's when you, like a pep rally, that's you're saying, we've done it. This is our data collection program, and we need everybody to get involved. And we will be present on that launch webinar, but it's really your event. It's your announcement that you have built this incredible research tool for your families and researchers in the industry. If I say PAG, that's a patient advocacy group, but we are using it in a very umbrella way. Some of you may be an undiagnosed patient or a family member, or an N of 1 patient or family member, or a Facebook group. And some of you may be a very sophisticated, been around for decades patient organization, and there may be several patient organizations. So PAG is an umbrella term for all of that. Our collaboration agreement is the agreement between RareX and you or your organization that we will collaborate. We will protect your identity and all the things that we should be doing with your data, and you will also abide by the ethics and research rules of using de-identified data. A community page, I'll probably refer to as a front door, and that's what we build for your organization. So it's your logo, your photos, some FAQ about what this is so your families can better understand it. And it actually has translations. And when I refer to data today, I'm always referring to de-identified data. That means that if your data that is you contribute to the DCP is going to have some identifiers, your name, your address, your email, and that is all stripped away before it's shared with any researchers. And even if it's shared in summary form to your organizations at some point, it's never with identifiers. Researcher in this presentation refers to all types of researchers. That means that researcher in the academic lab, or that researcher in the clinic, or that researcher at industry, whether it's a big pharmaceutical company or a small, startup biotech. Any of those types of researchers will have the same access, and that's what I mean by research. So what are we? Well, we are a program of global genes, as I said, and we were created out of tremendous frustration that things were just moving too slow. There's over 10,850 rare diseases, and very, very few, maybe 5%, maybe have some sort of treatment. And that's not acceptable. And we can't do this one disease at a time. So RareX was born out of frustration and the need to speed up the development of treatments and cures. We are a platform that collects data, mostly what we'll talk about today. We have the ability to connect to data that already exists. So imagine a study that was done in your disease 2 years ago, and the data is just sitting there. It was or wasn't published on. Or maybe there's data at a pharmaceutical company where the drug failed and there's just 5 years of data just getting dusty. Or you had a registry somewhere else and it's great data. There is an ability in the future for us to connect our research portal to those pre-existing data. And then finally, sharing data. It doesn't do us a whole lot of good to collect data if you don't get it out to the researchers that need to see it. So we're going to talk a lot about that. Again, remember, when I say share data, it's always de-identified. What you need to know, and what we will make very clear to your families at the time of launch, if you come on with RareX, is that this is not the replacement for other research in your disease. This is a complement to that research. We will not replace what has been happening and what will happen. We will be collaborators, and we will be complementary. So why have things been going so slowly? What is wrong with data in RareX, for goodness sakes? Well, several different things can be the problem. One is the data exists. There's 10 years of data collected by the foundation or the founding physician or an academic center, but it's not available to anybody outside of that collection. So if it was collected at a university, only the researchers at that university have access to it. which means that every time someone wants to learn more about a disease, they have to ask the same people the same questions over again. And then a few years later, another researcher comes along and thinks that they have a good idea, and they have to go back to the same community and ask the same questions, because nobody got access to that other data that was collected because it was in a silo. The other issue is data was collected with great intention and great enthusiasm and possibly a ton of money, but it wasn't structured. So structured means that it has a structure around it. It's not open text. Or it wasn't standardized, which is really important. And I will tell you, years ago, nobody was saying you need to collect use standardized surveys. They just said you need to collect data. Standardization allows for research across different conditions. So for instance, everybody who has seizures, regardless of their diagnosis, would answer the same seizure surveys. And that means their answers map to the same researcher, what they call ontologies or codes. And when the researchers go in to look at that data, they'll recognize the codes, but they can also look across different diseases about the same symptoms. And finally, and this might be the case with you, is that there's no data. There's no clinical data that was collected by any researchers or doctors, and there's no patient-reported data. And so you need to get started. So we launched the first class of communities in early 2021, and we are up to over 57 communities. So that was over 50 diseases in the first year, but we're working with more than 82 patient organizations or PAGs, because some of those diseases have more than one patient organization, and maybe your disease does too. And that's great. You know, sometimes you need a different organization in different countries, or a different organization with different focuses. And that's absolutely fabulous with us. So we asked these first groups, hey, why did you roll the dice on us? You know, we were new. What made you think that this was going to be what you needed to get the research done to find the treatments? And the answers we got were, they knew that this would speed up research and drug and device development, that they respected that we were collecting structured and standardized data and not letting them just bring their own questions, that the data is patient-owned and managed. And I'll get into this more, but these organizations were okay not being the owner and responsible party of the data. The fact that RareX will be handling all of the governance, and I have a slide to talk about that, and that this could eventually possibly connect to existing data sources, as I explained earlier. There is no cost to patient organizations, which means that those who had budgeted a certain amount of money for a registry for the next 20 years can use that funds for something else, whether it's for research or family support. And there's no cost to researchers. And this is pretty unusual. Often, at least to scientists at pharmaceutical companies and biotechs, or I'll refer to them as industry, data is often sold to them, which means it's not really a level playing field. So RareX decided to remove those barriers. So data is available to all researchers, despite where they are or what type of researchers they are, at no cost. And all of this is streamlined by a really cool, amazing researcher portal where researchers go, and it's called a federated data access and analysis platform, which means they'll be able to do the analysis in the cloud, which is super cool to those researchers that need to do statistical analysis. And the other thing that really excited groups was that this wasn't something that was going to take 18 months or 2 years like it did back in the day, that within 4 weeks of 4 phone calls that they could launch to their community. What's in it for you, the patient or the participant? And I will say we are using the term patient. We understand that you may not consider yourself or your family member a patient, but we had decided on this word because of confusion that exists when both the patient and other people in the family may be answering surveys. So our apologies if that word is offensive, but it's the word that we had to stick with. You can't expect people to come and answer questions and come back and update them at least annually if there's not something in it for them. And Amazon gift cards don't always do it. So what's in it for the patient or caregivers that are investing their time and effort and contributing their personal experiences and their genetic information? And if there's not something in it for them, they're not likely to do it more than once or at all. So one, they'll own and manage the data. Like I said, we'll talk about that more about the data sharing preference survey. The fact that they're going to get data back, not just what their data was that they entered, but how their answers compared to other people in the community with the same disease. So of everybody who said yes to respiratory issues, was it a large percent? Are you in that percent? Or did you say no? So this is informative on where you stand against other people with the same disease. For those interested in research and being part of clinical or drug trials down the road, this is an excellent place to be found because researchers will know about this and they may not have ever heard of your disease. I mean, there's more than 10,000. So they may go in looking at certain genes or certain symptoms and stumble across this data. And if you or your family member qualifies for a study because of age, location, combination of symptoms, whatever, then they can reach out to us and we can notify you that you qualify and you can choose to be in the study. More researchers worldwide will see this data. In the past, and I'll show you a slide, researchers had to know that you exist, they had to know that you had data, and then they had to ask you for it. This, again, will be researchers globally logging into one portal and looking across all sorts of diseases. There's also an ability for the patients or participants to connect with other patient organizations around the world if they choose, and to update symptoms at any time. And this is true of a lot of online platforms or registries. But I want to specify why this is important. If you only get invited back to a survey once a year, then you have to remember all the things that have happened in that 12 months. Or if you're invited back to your natural history study at a center of excellence, my daughter goes to the NIH, you have to remember all the things that have happened since your last visit a year ago. And that's hard. And it's very, we have very complicated patients and family members. So what we encourage your community to do is to come and update as things change. That way, there is a clear progression of disease that is seen across a person's lifetime. The other reason that people like you are interested or patients are interested in this is they can manage the use of their data. Do they want to share their data very widely, or do they want to put some limitations on it? And that's up to them. Finally, everybody's looking for faster treatments. So this is what I was saying, that on the left, a researcher has to know your disease exists. They have to know that there's data, then they have to go ask for it. And then the organization has to decide, is this worth our family's time? Is this something that is of interest to them? De-identify the data, send it off, and wait. Will it be a poster? Will it be a publication? Was there negative findings? Were there positive findings? And more often than not, the people that answer those surveys never find out the answers to those questions. And they will become exhausted. After enough of these surveys, they will stop doing them. On the right is this awesome new, let's change the way things are working model of RareX, where any of those patients from the 10,000 diseases, including undiagnosed, enter their data into the RareX platform. And again, remember, we're using standardized surveys. So no matter what your disease, you're answering questions based on your symptoms. And all these different researchers from around the world can go through one door, set up an account, and start looking. So, data standardization. That sounds boring. It does, but it's really important. As I said in the beginning, if you bring your own questions, like we all did in the early days, because we were so rare, we had to ask specific questions about our specific diseases. What happens is that researchers can't do a lot with that data. And also, there's an art and a science to surveys. There are actually survey methodologists, and I am not one of them, thankfully. I am not responsible for deciding if a survey is good or bad. So surveys have to be really good to collect high quality data, to get researchers in labs and industry the data they need. But at the end of the day, there's regulators, FDA, EMA, all these countries have drug regulators that decide if something is going to be approved or not. And they look at, where did that data come from? What's the quality of the data? Who touched the data? Who changed the data? And so this is, again, where we come in and make sure that, that the data is of the highest quality. There will be instances where people will need or want to bring in their own questions, and that will be possible. Or researchers may use RareX to bring in their own surveys. But we will always look at those questions and answers to make sure that they will yield high quality data. So we start with very simple head to toe survey. Do you have lung issues? Yes or no? Do you have heart issues? Yes or no? That's what we call the general core or head to toe survey, because it asks everything from the head to toe. Then it gets a little bit more specific. So you said yes to cardiac issues. So now you're going to see a cardiac survey with maybe 10 questions about cardiac. It's not going to give you a deep dive. It's not going to ask you, every medication you've been on or so forth, but it's going to ask you about different cardiac issues. From there, you may get a more specific survey, maybe not now, maybe 2 months from now, maybe a year from now. That is an even deeper dive about one of these symptoms. And so it will go. And so we're building this for all 10,000 diseases, and we're building it out as we can identify the best quality surveys. I told you I was going to talk about data governance. This is something that has always been on the burden of organizations like yours, but nobody ever talks about it or explains it. And I can tell you, as a former PI, I didn't understand it. And once I did, I didn't sleep, because data governance is everything about how you recruit people to enter data, how the data is entered, how the data is stored, how the data is kept safe, and how the data goes out the door. From start to finish, every ethical, legal, financial bit of responsibility is on that of the principal investigator. And that's not something that we think that patient organizations like yours should be responsible for, because it detracts from your fundraising and your conferences and your family support and doing other things in the research realm. So one of the big things that RareX has done is that we have taken on the data governance. This is our responsibility. And for those of you outside of the United States, you'll note at the bottom of this foundation is country by country regulations and compliance. Because yes, there are things like the European GDPR, but in fact, each European country may have their own understanding of data regulations. So all of this is on our shoulders. So benefit for researchers, because we don't want to just collect data and sit on it. We want to get it out the door. But researchers have to find that it's worth their time. Is it valuable? So one, it's free. It's at no cost to them. Nothing to lose there. The data is standardized. Remember, they like to see these answers that code to things. It's input globally. In some of your diseases, there are less than a dozen people in the world, certainly less than thousands. And collecting data in one language or one country is not going to get us very far. The data has been consented. And this may seem trivial, but we spent a year on our informed consent. The way data is consented dictates the way data will be used and shared in the future. And if you don't think of all the different ways it should be used and shared in the future, then you might have to reconsent them. So consenting is a very important technical stage that RareX has put a lot of thought into. And the researchers don't need to recruit the patients, and they don't need to consent the patients, and they don't need to build the technology. It's all done for them. We also have those that have genetic diseases upload their genetic reports, but they're full of identifiers. So we do something called curation. We curate the report. We take all of the genetic information on that report, and our genetic counseling group manually puts that into your account. So now all of your symptoms from the surveys that you answered are sitting with your genetics. This is really important to researchers. Some researchers don't want data that doesn't have the validation of genetics behind it. We even help you try and work with your communities and families to get their genetic reports if they don't have them. And the analysis, the ability to do analysis in the cloud. So generally, researchers would ask you for your data, you de-identify it, and you download it, and you'd export it. So now they've got an export, and now they have to do analysis. They have to clean it. Oh my goodness, this looks like the same patient. So there's duplicates. They got to take the duplicates out. Oh, this patient was born in the future. You've got to fix that. But they can't go back to the patients because it's de-identified data. So they have to work with what they've got. And then they have to do all the slicing and dicing and looking at the data from all different views and analyzing it. At RareX, all that data has been cleaned. It's then de-identified, and then it's available in this portal, and they can do all this fancy statistical analysis in the cloud, which saves them a lot of time and effort. They can query data on genetics, on symptoms, or disease. And this is where, as a rare parent, I get really excited because frankly, very few people have heard of my daughter's disease. And those who have already studied it and published on it. So our data is no great new finding. But when researchers go into RareX and they start looking at symptoms or combinations of symptoms, like I'm looking at all participants under the age of puberty that may have an autism diagnosis, low muscle tone, and communication deficits. Well, out of our 50 first diseases, 43 of the diseases have those things in common. So instead of finding the handful of diseases that researcher knows about, they're going to find dozens of diseases they've never even heard of. And they may start studying these diseases in depth. They may include them in their trials and so forth. So this ability to query across symptoms in addition to disease and genetics is really huge. And finally, this federated data access and analysis platform I keep bragging about, the fact that it is what's called federated is what allows it to look at data from other countries, which is why it can be global. So we support everybody. You may have been told that you are an N of 1. Nobody else has this genetic abnormality, or that you're undiagnosed. And that's okay, because maybe somebody's interested in your symptoms and not your disease name. There is a front door for undiagnosed, an N of 1, or you're part of a patient community, big or small. You may be, it may just be a couple of Facebook groups, or it may be several different legal entities like 501c3s that are nonprofits. Or there could be a disease consortia. There could be, you may have collaborated with other like diseases. There's several mitochondrial diseases, there's several sleep diseases, there's several vision loss diseases. So RareX can support all of these different types of groups. So first you go through the consent and the data sharing preferences. That's where you say, I want to share my data with everybody, or I want to share my data with a few less people. And then you provide your demographics, your identifying data plus your locations, and if you're a parent, caregiver, and so forth. And then you start with the head to toe survey. Remember I said all systems of the body, simple questions. The reason this is really important, you may have a brand new disease that hasn't been fully characterized. Everybody's still young. And so you may not know what all the symptoms are. So by asking questions about every system in the body, we can kind of pull out things that maybe researchers haven't asked about in the past. The other thing is, lots of us have more than one condition or disease. And so let's ask about all of them, because you're one person and you should report on everything. And it doesn't have to be just the things that are connected to your rare disease. It could be something you inherited from your mother, or something that you caught in camp and never got rid of. So whatever it is, it's all reportable in RareX. This also makes you more likely to be found for different types of studies and trials other than just that one rare disease. So you go from the head to toe survey to layer 2. But I don't have a lot of time on my hands. I don't want to answer questions about cardiac issues if I don't have cardiac issues. Well, we don't want you to either. So if you say no to something, that's the end of that. If you say yes or unsure, you'll get to layer 2. Survey layer 2. From there, your yeses, unsures may lead to more detailed surveys as we identify them. So if we don't have a survey about a particular vision issue, that doesn't mean we never will. It means that we will need to have a working group that are experts in that to find all the surveys, figure out which ones are going to yield quality data, and then let us know so we can launch those surveys. So we will always be releasing new surveys. Well, how do you find out about new surveys? I can't keep going back. Well, you don't. We'll send you a text or an email saying, hey, we're so excited to tell you that we now have a skeletal survey. Please come back and log back in and answer this new survey. So we encourage you and help you communicate to your community that this is not one and done. They need to go back and update that head to toe survey, not retake it, but update it. So if their symptoms change, they get the new surveys. So this is busy. Let's start at the top. This is our data collection model. So like I said, we support patients, communities, and consortia. The next, we just talked about the flow. So you sign in, you sign up, you get your password, you do your consent, your data sharing preferences, which by the way, you can change in the future, your demographics and your role, and then you do your head to toe survey. And then there's additional surveys. So at the top, we have some examples of patient communities. So there's your disease right in the center. I told you that we bring in diseases, communities in a class. So maybe 10 communities will, it's like going through orientation together for 4 weeks, 1 hour a week. For each of those communities, we will build a community page, but it looks like yours. Your families will arrive there through your website or through a link on your social media, and they'll feel at home. They see pictures they recognize, they see colors that they know, and they see your logo, and they see the name of the disease. They know this is home. If you've got several organizations around the world, there could be several logos. Even the better, the more logos, the better. Then they hit get started. And that's when they enter what I call the big blue house in the middle of this slide. And that, again, you see the consent, the data sharing, and the head to toe survey, and then all of the other surveys that will follow. And as I said, you don't see surveys unless you've said yes or unsure to something. That's called skip or branch logic. And finally, at the bottom are those all-important researchers that we need to see this data. They need to play with it and analyze it and share it with other researchers and build sandboxes and notebooks and all these cool things in the cloud where they can figure out things that have not been determined yet. So this is not an eye chart. This is just an example that in our first year, we have brought on many disease communities and even more patient organizations, PAGs. So as I said, you may just be a Facebook group, or you may be someone who's part of a disease that's been around for a while and has several organizations. Absolutely fine. So we have working groups that look for the best data, the best surveys that will yield the best data for those researchers and regulators. Well, I don't know what that is, and my colleagues don't know what that is. So we bring in experts from the outside, not one or two. We bring in experts from industry, we bring in experts from academia and research, from the clinicians that actually see patients, and from patients or representatives. And they all huddle around and figure out all of the different surveys that could be asked. So in neurodevelopment, they started with over 250 surveys, and they got it down to 50. And finally, after several months, we released 13 surveys that were applicable to neurodevelopmental patients. And that's the process that we'll go through for all of our surveys. Well, you have that launch party, and you've gone live, and you've gone out to your community, and you've said, we need you to come in and set up those accounts and sign those consents and provide your data and your genetic report if you have one. But it doesn't stop there. You can't stop there because this isn't one and done. And Not everybody saw that message, and there may be new families diagnosed next week or next month or next year. So this is ongoing for you. Well, you got a lot going on already. So we need to be there to give you ongoing support, and we will be. We will not drop you like a hot potato after that launch party. We will provide you with tips and documents and webinars and lunch and learns and recordings and examples from other groups that have been really successful on what you could try to do. So we are there in any capacity that you need us. Talk about front doors or community pages. This is 6 examples. So you'll see up in the left-hand corner is the disease name, AHC or CHD2. AHC, for instance, has 3 different logos. They have 3 different organizations in the United States that are supporting this. They're sharing this information with all of their community. When you see there's different colors and different pictures, and that's because we tailor your front door to your community. Let me go back for a second. It explains to the patient or family what this is, where it says why you should participate. There's a list of the things about what is in it for them. And then it shows how they enroll. And at the bottom of this page, it's frequently asked questions. Now you'll see this can be translated into several several languages. But currently, once you hit get started, unfortunately, everything is in English. It can't stay that way, and we know that. We are committed to being global. In the next year, we will roll out at least 3 translations, starting with Spanish, then French and Portuguese. And we will continue to roll out translations. This is a very involved process because you have to make sure that you have met international data regulations in the country where the language is spoken. You have to make sure that it is properly translated from English to that language and back again, and that it's culturally appropriate. So this is not an easy, quick task, but it's something that we are absolutely committed to. And currently we have close to 60 different countries represented by our enrollment. So what do you need to do this? Well, you need to make sure that your board of directors, your scientific advisors, your decision makers are with you on this decision. So share this recording with them, set up a call with us. And once you've done that, you decide who's going to attend 4 one-hour calls with the rest of the class. And we onboard a class about once a month. And then you invest that 1 hour. If you miss a class, if you miss a call, it's okay. We'll send you the recordings and the slides. And then you have that launch party. So what do you have to do and what do we have to do? Well, we tried to make our column to be the hard stuff. So we take care of all the governance and all the technology, and we deal with all that sticky data regulation compliance around the world. You sign the agreement saying that you will be responsible with the data, and we will be responsible with the data. You attend those 4 Zooms, and you provide us with those logos and photos for that front door or community page. We build out the community page. We provide you with the content to put on your website, to put on your social media, and we will be there to support you. But at the bottom, post-launch, is you will need to continue to make this part of the conversation in your community on an ongoing basis forever, because this is what you're doing. You're getting all of your patients now and in the future to enroll and contribute data longitudinally, at least once a year, so that you can see a progression of disease or a natural history study. We will be there for you during this engagement. We'll help you the best we can. So hopefully you have a whole page of notes and lots of questions. You can email us at both of us at megan.o'boyle@globalgenes.org, caitlin.peters@globalgenes.org. That way, if one of us can't get back to you right away, the other can. So we encourage you to send us those emails. A few questions that if this were live, you might be asking. So who's paying for this if we're a nonprofit? Well, you're probably a nonprofit too. And how do nonprofits get their funding? They get it through philanthropic donations, which we have done. There's a great philanthropy group that is supporting a contest we have coming up. We get it through grants, and I'm sure you've tried to write a few of those. We have lots of different grants out to different organizations, and we get it through sponsors. And most of those sponsors are from industry. And that is because they want us to be successful. At the end of the day, industry, biopharma, needs quality data on these rare diseases. And if we're going to do all the hard work, the recruitment, the consenting, the technology, the standardization, and the patient engagement, then they're willing to contribute towards that being successful. Who's responsible for upgrades? That's always going to be us, whether it's a translation or it's a new survey or a technology upgrade, that will be on RareX. Who owns and controls the use of the data? Again, that's you as the participant. So what does that mean, owns the data? I don't like people owning data. Well, the participant manages their own data, not the PAG, not the organization that represents the disease, not RareX. The person that enters the data. And in the data sharing survey, they will say, I want to share my data with any type of researcher or just scientific, medical, biomedical researchers, one or the other. And then they can say, I want to share my data with everybody but industry, because maybe some people don't like biopharma. I wouldn't have checked that box, but that's the thing. Everybody gets to make their own decision. You could say, I want to share my data regardless of whether there's a formal study that's been pre-approved by an institutional IRB or institutional review board. Or you could say, I only want researchers that have had their study given the stamp approval of their university or medical center's IRB board. And that just means that they had a board that reviewed their science and their ethics and said, yes, this is great. So these are all different levels of data sharing that you can decide on. And you can go back and change your mind and change your answers. If, for instance, somebody was doing research and they were from a biopharma or industry, and you had said, no, you're not ready to share your data with them yet. When they do their query, if your data would have fallen within that query, they just won't see it. There's a gate that would prohibit them from even knowing that data existed. If you change your answer in the future, then that gate would open and they would see into that de-identified data. So this is getting a bit in the weeds, but those of you outside of the United States might say, what about GDPR compliance? Who's the data controller? So the data processor is a tech platform, and the data controller is whoever is deciding how that data is going to be shared, which is you, the participant, but also the one who sees the identified data, which is us at Matrix. So we are the data controller. And that means we have a tremendous responsibility in terms of data compliance, and we take that very seriously. So who can provide surveys? Well, I went through this long standardization explanation of how we find the right surveys. But maybe there is a survey that a researcher really needs or an industry really needs on a specific disease, or your organization really wants some specific information that we don't currently ask and we're not likely to ask soon. Yes, there is a mechanism for new surveys or questions to be added. You would just have to consult with our survey team and see how that would be done. If surveys are updated by new answers, so this is why I said this isn't one and done. We're collecting data over time. But if you said no to something and then you said yes, that no still stays. So researchers will see all of your answers through time at every date stamp. It doesn't matter if there was a week between your answers or 2 years between your answers. But it does show that something has changed or something has not changed. And this is what people are looking for when they say they need a natural history study. They need to see progression of disease. And that is what RareX wants to show. How do researchers access this data? Well, if you are a researcher, you can go to that QR code over my shoulder, and it will take you to the RareX website. And up in the right-hand corner, you can click on Researcher, and there's a Research Access, and it will show you step-by-step how that data can be accessed. In short, there's an application that you will complete as a researcher to request data. It will be reviewed by RareX. You will be given authorization, and then you will go ahead and set up your account, and you're off to the races. I appreciate your time today. I hope this was informative. If you think that RareX may be the right fit for your organization or you, I encourage you to reach out to us. Let us know what your disease is, what your organization or community looks like, and what your timing is. And let us know any other questions that you have, and we'd be happy to answer. Thanks again for your time today, and we're here for you when you need us.